Hello class! Today we're covering part 2 of day 1 of John Perry's dialogue concerning personal identity and immortality. Here's some study guide questions to help us get started. 1. What is mind-body dualism? 2. Which principle does Miller commit to when explaining how his dualism is compatible with knowing that he's talking with Weirob? 3. Which dilemma does Weirob pose for Miller's principle? 4. What is the point of Weirob's chocolate analogy? 5. How does Miller revise his principle in light of Weirob's chocolate analogy? 6. What is the point of Weirob's Blue River analogy? Okay. As usual, you might want to pause the video and write down the answers to these study guide questions as they appear in the video. It'll help you compartmentalize and organize the information that I'm giving you. So, when we last left off, Weirob and Miller were talking about whether Gretchen can survive her death and whether there's any sense in which that's not just an absurd contradiction. We talked about identity, and we talked about how to show something as possible. It's at this point that Miller jumps in, and he presents his Christian idea that Weirob has an immortal soul. Miller is a mind-body dualist. Here's what mind-body dualism is. Mind-body dualism is the thesis that a person has, or a person is, an immaterial substance, an entity that does not take up any space, it is not made of matter, and which carries or houses the consciousness of an individual person. Most mind-body dualists believe that the soul, as we'll call it, is separable from the body, can outlast the body, and that even when the body decays, dies, rots away, or is burned away, the soul will still survive. It will contain all of the individual's memories and their thoughts and their desires, and so that's the sense in which an individual can live on past their death. Understandably, Weirob is skeptical of the idea of a soul. She notes that if the soul is an immaterial thing that cannot be perceived, there's a puzzle about how Miller knows that he's talking with Weirob and not some other person. How does Miller know that the soul that's in Weirob's body is Weirob's soul, and not, say, the soul of Mark Spitz? In response, Miller subscribes to this principle. Whenever you've got the same body, you've got the same soul. Souls do not switch bodies or move around. Once a soul is housed in a body, it stays in that body until, well, the body dissipates or is destroyed. So that's his principle. Whenever you've got the same body, you've got the same soul. Even though the converse is not true. I mean, if the converse were true, then there would be no hope for an afterlife for Weirob, would there? So Miller's got this principle. Whenever you've got the same body, you've got the same soul. Weirob poses a little bit of a dilemma for Miller. It doesn't take long for Miller to decide which horn of the dilemma he'd like to go with, but still, it's worth noting this dilemma because it helps reveal the structure of the argument. The dilemma concerns how Miller knows this principle. How does Miller know that whenever you've got the same body, you've got the same soul? What's the source of that knowledge? And she presents two options. Either Miller knows the truth of this principle a priori, he knows it a priori, as many people say, or he knows it because it's a confirmed empirical matter of fact. Let's talk a minute about what a priori knowledge is. A person knows something a priori when they can justify it without appealing to any specific or particular experiences that they've had, or that anyone else has had, or by appealing to data that comes from instruments that augment our experience, like microscopes or telescopes. As an example, let's contrast a couple of claims that you might know. Suppose I say, the kitten is in the kitchen. How do I know that? How could I justify the claim that there's a kitten in the kitchen? Well, I would have to appeal to some particular experience. The experience of seeing the kitten go into the kitchen. The experience of hearing someone's testimony about where the kitten is. The experience of reading about the kitten's location. I need to appeal to some experience that I've had or that someone has had in order to establish where the kitten is. Contrast that with 2 plus 2 is 4. How do I know that 2 plus 2 is 4? How can I justify that? Well, I don't need to point to any specific experience that I've had when it comes to adding things. When someone asks how I know that 2 plus 2 is 4, I don't need to bring up that one time in kindergarten when we played with oranges and grouped them and learned the names of numbers. I don't need to think of some particular experience in which I witnessed 2 plus 2 equaling 4. No. To show how I know that 2 plus 2 is 4, I just need to appeal to the concepts themselves. The concept of 2, the concept of 4, the concept of adding, and as long as you've got those concepts, which you can get from a variety of experiences, you can justify that 2 plus 2 is 4. That's how a priori knowledge works. A priori knowledge is knowledge of stuff that you can justify just by appealing to the concepts in question, where you don't have to point at some particular experience that you or someone has had. You just need to point at how the concepts work themselves, and that explains how you know. That's how a priori knowledge works. Note that a priori knowledge is not quite the same thing as innate knowledge. To say that you know something innately is to say that you know it from birth. Now, if you know something from birth, you probably know it a priori as well, but the converse isn't true. Just because you can justify something by appealing to pure concepts, that doesn't mean that you didn't need any experience in the first place to get those concepts. It just means that the particular experience that you've got is accidental to justifying the claim in which those concepts are used. So Weirob is asking Miller this: hey Miller, how do you know that whenever you've got the same body, you've got the same soul? Is that some bit of a priori knowledge? Do you just know that because that's part of the definition of a soul? And Miller says, no. That's not how I know it. Weirob says, okay then, so your principle that whenever you've got the same body, you've got the same soul, that principle must be justified by particular experiences. That must be a justified regularity. And here she brings in the chocolate analogy. The point of Weirob's chocolate analogy is to show that the principle, same body, same soul, cannot be an empirically confirmed regularity. It can't be something that you verify with experience. Why? Because in order to establish and verify that two things always go together, you need to witness them both going together. She points out that when Miller selects which chocolate he wants to eat, and that he wants to eat the caramel one, he chooses it based on it having a swirl on top. He's confirmed using experience that a swirl means caramel. He's found one chocolate that had caramel inside, and he found that it had a swirl. He found another chocolate and verified that it had caramel inside and found that it had a swirl. And he found another chocolate that verified that it had caramel inside and that it had a swirl. And so, by witnessing this pattern of swirl being conjoined with caramel, Miller can verify that the swirl and the caramel always go together. He can verify the principle of same chocolate, same filling. The problem, of course, is that you can't do that with people and their souls. You can't verify that, yep, we've got Weirob's body, and here is Weirob's soul, and then on another occasion say, here's Weirob's body again, and yep, here's Weirob's soul again too, and do that over and over and over to establish that whenever you've got the same body, you've got the same soul. Why can't you do that? Well, because you can't sense, you can't detect, you can't see souls. You can tell that a certain chocolate will always go with a certain filling because you can independently detect both of them, and so you can verify them always going together. But because you cannot independently detect a soul, you can't verify that that soul is always going with the body. How would you know that you always have the same soul going with the same body? You can't see them or taste them the way that you can see or taste a chocolate filling. And so Weirob challenges Miller that he doesn't actually know who he's talking to. For all Miller knows, it could be Mark Spitz's soul in the body of Weirob, and he would never know. So that's the point of the chocolate analogy, is to show that the principle of same body, same soul cannot be something that's confirmed through experience of verifying that pattern. Now, in response to this problem that Weirob raises, Miller revises his principle. Miller says this, that Weirob's soul has her personality in it. It has all of her beliefs and her desires and everything that we would call her character. And that character, that personality, causes her to behave in a certain way. So that's how you can detect what soul is in a person's body, by detecting their behavior. The soul causes the behavior, you detect the behavior, and you note that because it's the same behavior, you must have the same soul. If it were a different soul, there would be different behavior. People have different personalities, after all. And so that's his revised principle. Miller's revised principle is, whenever you've got the same behavior, you've got the same soul. And since you can detect behavior and verify that the same behavior is going on with the same body, that's how you can verify that the same soul is always in the same body. Now, in response to this, Weirob raises the Blue River analogy. Here's the thing about the Blue River, Weirob points out, that at any given time, the Blue River has more or less the same behavior. It's turgid, it's sludgy, it's not exactly blue. It behaves in a very specific blue rivery sort of way. That's its behavior. Now let's ask, what causes that behavior? What makes the Blue River behave in that way? We can easily understand that it's the water and the way that the water flows and how it flows across that specific riverbed. That's what constitutes the river's behavior, is all that water. But note, because it's a river, every single moment there's different water flowing through it. The water causes the behavior, but from the fact that it's the same behavior, you can't infer that it's the same water. On the contrary, the same behavior is caused by a stream of different bits of water every second. Why can't souls work like that? Why can't Weirob be like the Blue River, having a certain sort of behavior, having that behavior be the same over time, having that behavior be caused by soul, but having a different soul every second? In other words, why can't it be like this? At 12 o'clock noon, Weirob has a certain soul. That soul carries Weirob's intentions, her memories, her desires, her personality. Then, at 12:01 p.m., that soul pops out of Weirob's body, and another soul pops in. That second soul inherits all of the personality, all of the intentions, desires, beliefs that the first soul was carrying. It inherits them, and now it animates Weirob's body. Until 12:02 p.m., when it pops out and another one pops in, also inheriting the same personality traits. At every different minute, there's a new soul in Weirob's body, but Weirob's behavior stays the same. Why can't it be like that? Now, if this is your first time considering this possibility, you might react in the way that Miller reacts, by saying, that's a ridiculous idea. I've never heard of something so silly. The idea that a stream of souls is constantly going through a person, making them behave the same way, and yet not a single one of their souls lasts for more than a second? And it is a silly idea. But here's the thing, and this is true in philosophy generally, the fact that something is silly by itself doesn't show that it's logically impossible. Remember, Miller doesn't think that it's a definitional truth, that it's a priori that a soul has to stay in the same body. That would be too strong of a claim. We can easily conceive of souls switching bodies. It happens all the time in, like, Freaky Friday movies and stuff. But if it's not a definitional, necessary, a priori truth that souls stay in the same bodies, then how does Miller rule out a possibility like the Blue River picture? How can Miller rule out the possibility that a stream of souls, each psychologically similar to the next, inhabit any given person, making them behave the same way over time, but nonetheless failing to last beyond the death of the body? Miller says he doesn't know. He has to think about it. But he promises to return with a good objection. Weirob, being a good philosopher, looks forward to it. She likes objections, and she likes responses. And that's where we're going to leave it for now. That was the second half of the first night of Perry's dialogue on personal identity and immortality. We'll pick up with the second night, part one of the second night, next time. Thanks for watching.